His phone wouldn't stop vibrating inside the dry bag, that muffled angry buzz that sounded like a trapped insect. Mark ignored it and kept his eyes on the monitor, because the live feed was all he had right now. A black shape sat on the sand 40 feet below, half buried, like it had been waiting there for years. The letters on the door were still visible in the LED glare. United States of America. On the deck beside him, a Starbucks cup sweated through the cardboard sleeve, already cold. The wind off the Pacific cut through his hoodie. His gloved hand tightened on the joystick. When the ROV's camera drifted past the rear bumper, the presidential seal flashed and then disappeared under a slow wave of silt. He swallowed hard and told himself it was just a car. Metal and paint. History that someone lost in the water. Salvage money with a story attached. Then the camera dipped to the trunk seam. The latch was bent, like someone had forced it shut from the inside. Mark's throat went dry. He leaned closer to the screen, so close his breath fogged the plastic cover. A tiny stream of bubbles slipped out from the crack, steady and patient, as if something down there was still letting go of air. He heard his own voice before he realized he was speaking. "That's not right." His phone buzzed again. A text preview lit up the corner of the screen with one line from his ex: "Rent is due, and Lily needs new shoes. Please do not ignore me." Mark didn't blink. He couldn't. Because the ROV light caught something pale wedged in the trunk gap, fluttering like a flag underwater. Paper. A lot of it. And something else. Something that looked too much like a human hand until his brain corrected itself and said, "No, it's not a hand, it's..." He yanked the joystick back like the screen could bite him, and the camera jerked away. The image swam, then steadied on empty sand. Mark's chest hurt, like he'd been holding his breath the whole time. He finally opened the dry bag, snatched his phone, and saw 12 missed calls from an unknown number. The last voicemail was only 5 seconds long. A man's voice, low and controlled, said, "Mr. Harlan, stop what you're doing right now." Mark stared at the ocean, then back at the feed, and felt the kind of fear that didn't feel like danger. It felt like consequence. Mark lived in a one-bedroom apartment in National City, the kind wedged between an auto body shop and a payday loan place with neon that never turned off. From his window, he could see a sliver of highway and, if the air was clear, a slice of the bay. The apartment smelled like old carpet and dish soap because he cleaned too much when his mind wouldn't settle. He wasn't supposed to be the kind of guy who got rattled. He'd been underwater in zero visibility, hands on a chain you couldn't see, trusting your own calm more than your eyes. He'd worked around ship hulls that creaked and groaned like animals in their sleep. He'd seen the ocean swallow things without apology. But that morning, after he'd pulled the ROV back onto the boat and pretended his shaking hands were just cold, he drove home on autopilot and sat in his parking spot with the engine off. His forehead rested against the steering wheel. A single tear slid down and hit the faded leather with a tiny sound, like a bead dropping. He didn't cry often. Not because he was tough. Because crying felt like opening a door he might not be able to close. His bank app showed $92 and some change. Child support was due in 5 days. He had a stack of unopened mail on the kitchen counter that he kept moving from one side to the other, like shifting it could change what it said. His oxygen tank certification renewal was overdue because he couldn't afford the class fee right now. Every problem had a price tag. The dive job had sounded like a gift at first. A buddy from his old crew, Darnell, had called and said there was easy money. A private contractor wanted an ROV sweep on something sensitive near La Jolla, deeper than most recreational divers went, but nothing Mark couldn't handle. No hero stuff, just a scan, some footage, a GPS coordinate, and then a salvage team would take over. Mark asked what it was, and Darnell hesitated. That hesitation was a whole conversation. "It's a vehicle," Darnell finally said. "A weird one." "How weird?" "Just show up," Darnell replied. "You want the deposit or not?" Mark said yes because yes is what you say when your kid needs shoes. Lily was 8. She loved ramen noodles, hated loud movies, and still held his hand in parking lots like the world might run her over if she let go. Her mom, Jenna, didn't hate him, not exactly. She was just tired of living around his unpredictable money and his silence. She'd moved on to a steadier life, and Mark didn't blame her, which almost made it worse. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and saw another message from Jenna, this one softer. Lily asked if you're coming to her winter music thing. She wants you there. Please answer. He typed, I'm coming, and stared at it for a long time before hitting send, like committing to it was the only part that mattered. The voicemail from the unknown number sat in his inbox like something alive. He played it again, just to be sure he hadn't imagined the tone. Mr. Harlan, stop what you're doing right now. No threat. No shouting. Just certainty. Mark called it back. It rang twice, then went to a recorded message that said the mailbox was full. He paced his apartment, barefoot on the cheap laminate, stepping over Lily's little sneaker that she'd left last weekend. He hadn't moved it because it made the place feel less empty. He thought about the letters on the car door, the seal, the way the trunk latch looked wrong. He thought about the paper fluttering in the crack like it was trying to get out. It could have been nothing. People dump stolen cars. People hide stuff. People lie. But it was a presidential car. Even saying it sounded ridiculous, like a headline that would come with a winking emoji. The kind of thing you'd see on your feed and scroll past, assuming it was fake. Mark wasn't the type to chase conspiracy stories. He didn't have the energy. He barely had the energy to microwave dinner without staring into space. He made coffee and forgot to drink it. He stood at the sink and watched a drip from the faucet fall in slow intervals, counting them because counting was something he could control. 1, 2, 3. His mind kept trying to make the trunk into a simple story. A lost car. A salvage find. A payout. Rent paid. Lily's shoes bought. A small win. But the ocean didn't hold simple stories. The ocean held what people wanted to forget. Around noon, Darnell called. Mark almost didn't answer. He did anyway, because ignoring calls was how his life got worse. You get the footage? Darnell asked. Yeah, Mark said, and his voice sounded normal, which surprised him. You upload it? Not yet. There was a pause that felt too heavy for two guys talking about a job. Then Darnell cleared his throat. Listen, man. The client's asking for it ASAP. Who is the client? Mark asked. Another pause. Don't do that. Do what? Ask questions that make people nervous. Mark leaned against the counter and stared at Lily's sneaker. The sole was worn down on one side because she dragged her foot when she got shy. Mark knew that tiny detail like it was a fact about gravity. Somebody left me a voicemail, Mark said. Darnell didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was lower. What did it say? Mark told him. Darnell exhaled through his nose. Okay. That's it, Mark said. Okay. Mark, Darnell said, and for the first time he sounded like a friend instead of a contractor. Sometimes you find something that comes with people attached. People you don't want attached to you. Mark felt his stomach turn, not from panic, but from a tired kind of sadness. He was so sick of being the person life happened to. The broke guy. The ex-husband. The dad who said, I'm trying, and hoped it counted for something. I didn't go looking for trouble, Mark said. I know, Darnell replied. I'm just saying. Be smart. After the call, Mark sat on his couch and opened the laptop. The footage file stared back at him from the desktop, a plain icon that held an image big enough to change his life in directions he couldn't predict. Outside, a car alarm chirped and stopped. Somewhere down the hall, Someone laughed at a TV show. Normal life kept going like nothing had happened at the bottom of the ocean. Mark opened a second window and typed in the words he hadn't wanted to say out loud. Presidential car lost at sea. Search results came up fast, messy, half rumor, half old articles about transport accidents, retired motorcade auctions, private collectors. He clicked until his eyes hurt and still didn't find the exact thing he'd seen. The not knowing made his chest tighten. He closed the laptop and rubbed his face with both hands. If he sent the footage, he got paid, and the problem became someone else's. If he didn't, he kept the footage, and the problem became his. He thought about Lily on a school stage in a cheap paper snowflake costume, scanning the audience for him. He thought about how she lit up when she saw him, like he was still her safe place. Mark picked up his phone and stared at the unknown number again. Then he opened Jenna's text thread and typed, "I love her. I'm trying. I'll be there." He didn't send anything else because he didn't want to make promises he couldn't keep. He looked at the laptop one more time. The ocean floor didn't terrify him. People did. Mark did not sleep much that night, and the hours passed slowly. While the city outside his window kept breathing on its own schedule, he stayed on the couch with the television glowing softly without sound, and the light moved across the walls like waves each time his eyes closed. His mind returned to the dark water, and the shape resting below, and his body reacted before thought could stop it. It was not panic, but a deep tired pressure like carrying a heavy bag. For too long. Morning arrived with gray light and traffic noise, and Mark stood in the kitchen holding a mug of coffee that grew cold in his hand. He watched people on the sidewalk hurry past with backpacks and phones and headphones, and purposed their lives moved forward in straight lines while his felt paused at the edge of something he could not yet name. He felt separate from them, like he was watching through glass. Without much thought he drove to the marina again. Even though he had no reason to be there, the air smelled like salt fuel and wet rope, and the familiar mix grounded him. Boats rocked gently against the docks and water slapped wood in a steady rhythm. Mark leaned on the railing and focused on that sound because it was simple and real. Luis was there checking a line and talking about his back hurting and the cost of groceries going up again. Mark listened and nodded because listening required less effort than explaining. At one point Luis looked at him more closely and said, "You look like someone who saw something he wishes he had not." Mark did not answer, and Luis did not push, and that small mercy mattered more than Luis knew. His phone rang, and this time Mark answered right away when he saw Jenna's name. She asked if he was truly coming to Lily music thing, and her voice carried a mix of hope and caution. Mark said yes and meant it, and for a moment that felt like the most important decision of the day. Jenna went quiet, then said, "Good, she will be looking for you," and the call ended without tension. Mark sat alone in his truck afterward and rested his hands on the steering wheel. He thought about Lily's fingers wrapped around his, and how she still trusted him even when he doubted himself. That trust felt heavy, but it also gave him direction. When he returned home, Mrs. Alvarez was sitting near the stairs with grocery bags at her feet. She smiled and asked if he could help, and Mark picked them up without hesitation. They walked slowly, and she talked about her late husband and how afternoons felt longer now. Mark listened and felt a quiet connection that did not require fixing anything. Inside, her apartment smelled like soap and cinnamon and old furniture. She asked about Lily, and Mark told her she was growing fast. Mrs. Alvarez nodded and said children grow even when parents feel stuck, and her words stayed with him after he left. Back in his apartment, Mark sat at the small table and opened his laptop. He did not open the footage, and instead looked at old photos of Lily smiling, missing a tooth, and holding a paper snowflake. He stayed there longer than he planned, because those images reminded him of who he was outside of fear. Later he walked to the corner store, and the city noise wrapped around him. A bus passed splashing water from the street, and someone argued on the phone, and the cashier barely looked up. Mark felt oddly comforted by the ordinary chaos because it reminded him that life did not stop just because he felt uncertain. That evening he picked up Lily, and she talked non-stop about school and music, and how nervous she felt. Mark told her being nervous meant she cared, and she nodded seriously as if storing that thought for later. For a while, he was not a diver or a man with a secret, but just a father listening. They ate together and laughed at small things, and time moved faster than expected. When it was time to take her back, she hugged him tight and told him not to forget. Mark promised, and this time the promise felt steady. Back home alone, the memory of the voicemail returned without sound, the calm voice, and the certainty no longer scared him as much as it unsettled him. A quiet anger settled in, not loud or reckless but firm and patient. Mark sat down and wrote everything he remembered about the dive, the depth, the location, the seal, the trunk, the paper. Putting it into words made it less like a nightmare, and more like a fact that existed outside his body. He did not feel brave, and he did not feel special. He felt like a tired man trying to choose the right thing. Even when it was uncomfortable, he locked the drive away, and turned off the lights. As he lay down, the city noise faded into a low hum. His problems were not solved, and the weight was still there, but for the first time since the dive he knew he was moving forward instead of standing still. Mark woke before the alarm and stayed still while the early light crept across the room. His body felt slow and heavy, like it had been pulled upward too fast from deep water. The thoughts returned quietly, but all at once, filling every open space in his mind. The car, the trunk, the voice. They were not images anymore, but weights. He moved through the morning without intention. He showered, dressed, and made coffee without tasting it. Each action felt borrowed from a version of himself that still believed. Days followed plans. That version felt distant, like someone he used to know. The locked drawer pulled his attention again. He stood in the kitchen staring at it longer than he meant to. Inside was the drive, and the simple fact of its presence made the room feel smaller. It was strange how something so small could carry such pressure. He tried to distract himself by cleaning. He wiped counters already clean, straightened shoes that were already aligned, folded laundry that did not need folding. None of it quieted the question sitting beneath everything: what happens if I stay silent? The thought of Lily came without warning. He pictured her on the stage, scanning the room. He knew the look she made when she searched for him. That look carried hope and doubt together. The idea of not showing up felt heavier than any threat. By late morning he left the apartment and drove without a destination. Traffic crawled and horns sounded, but none of it reached him. His hands stayed steady on the wheel while his thoughts drifted elsewhere. He felt separate from his own body. He parked near the bay and walked along the water. The surface looked calm, reflecting sky and buildings. Nothing about it hinted at the weight below. That contrast unsettled him more than fear ever had. Mark sat on a bench and watched people pass. Runners moved with purpose. Couples talked quietly. Parents pushed strollers while staring at phones. Everyone carried something invisible. He wondered how many people were holding choices that scared them. His phone vibrated in his pocket. The unknown number appeared again. Mark stared at it until the screen went dark. His hands shook slightly, not from panic, but from the strain of deciding. The voice replayed in his memory, calm, certain, unbothered. It reminded him of authority figures who never raised their voices, people who expected compliance because they had always received it. In that moment Mark understood the real pressure. It was not danger, it was the request for silence, the expectation that he would step back and let things sink quietly. He had spent too much of his life stepping back. He returned home as the afternoon faded. The apartment felt tight and loud despite the quiet. He sat at the table and opened the notebook again, the one that already carried the shape of the truth. He wrote about the dive slowly, the depth, the cold, the way the trunk looked forced shut. He wrote about the paper pressed into the seam, how it looked desperate, even underwater. Writing grounded him. It slowed his breathing and sharpened the memory. This was the moment he could not undo. Even though nothing dramatic happened, this was the breaking point. Mark understood that sending the footage away would remove him from the story. Staying silent would tie him to it. Neither option felt safe, but only one felt honest. That evening he drove to the school auditorium. He took a seat in the back while parents filled the room. Programs rustled and quiet conversations floated through the air. Phones glowed and then dimmed. When Lily stepped onto the stage, she looked small and serious. Her eyes searched the crowd. When she saw him, her shoulders relaxed. That single moment cracked something open inside him. As the music played, his eyes burned, not just from pride, but from understanding what trust really meant: showing up, staying present, not turning away when it mattered. After the performance, Lily ran to him and wrapped her arms tight. "You came," she said. Mark nodded, because words felt unreliable. The drive home felt different. The fear was still there, but it no longer led. Something steadier had taken its place. Back in the apartment, Mark unlocked the drawer. He placed the drive on the table and sat with it. He did not rush. He let the weight exist. He remembered something an instructor once said: safety is not about avoiding risk, it is about choosing which risk you can live with. Mark knew this choice would not fix his life, it would not solve money or erase consequences, but it would let him look at himself without turning away. He picked up the phone and made a call, not to the unknown number, not to Darnell, but to someone whose job was to listen. He spoke carefully and clearly. He described the dive, the location, the car, the trunk. He did not exaggerate, he did not soften anything. When he finished there was silence, then a calm voice said, "Thank you for telling us." Mark ended the call and sat back, his heart beat hard, but steady. The weight had not vanished, but it had shifted. Outside the city moved as it always did. Cars passed, lights came on, life continued. Mark sat in the quiet, knowing that whatever followed would follow. He had crossed the hardest line, the line between fear and responsibility. Mark woke the next morning to a quiet that felt different from before, not empty and not heavy, but settled. The city outside still moved with the same rhythm of traffic and voices and distant sirens, but inside his chest something had loosened. He made coffee and drank it while standing by the window. For the first time in days, he noticed the warmth of the mug in his hands. He noticed the way sunlight touched the buildings across the street. Nothing had changed on the surface, and yet his body felt calmer. The phone stayed silent, no unknown number, no sudden demand. That silence did not feel like relief, but it gave him space to think. He understood now that whatever happened next would not be loud or dramatic. Real life rarely was. Mark went to work later that day on a routine inspection job, nothing deep and nothing risky, just checking equipment and logging conditions. The familiarity steadied him. He focused on small tasks and did them carefully. Doing something well felt grounding. During lunch he sat alone with a sandwich and watched people move through the marina. A couple argued quietly near their car, a kid laughed while chasing birds. Life carried on with all its small moments stacked together. Mark realized how much he had missed noticing them. That afternoon he got a short call, no pressure, no warning, just a request to stay available if questions came up. The voice was polite and distant. Mark agreed and hung up. The call ended without drama, and that felt right. He picked up Lily that evening. She ran to him with the same energy as always. She talked about school and a song she liked and how her friend forgot the words on stage. Mark listened and smiled and felt present, really present. They walked to the park near her building. The air was cool and kids ran across the grass. Lily swung while Mark pushed slowly. She asked why he looked happier. Mark thought about the answer. He said, "Sometimes doing the right thing feels lighter than doing nothing." She nodded like she understood enough. Later they sat on a bench sharing fries. Lily leaned against his arm. Mark watched the sky darken and felt a quiet gratitude for that small moment. No headlines, no secrets, just being there. When he dropped her off, Lily hugged him and said, "See you soon." Mark promised and felt steady saying it, not hopeful in a fragile way, but confident in a simple one. Back home the apartment felt less tight. The walls were the same, but the air moved easier. Mark opened the drawer and looked at the empty space where the drive had been. He felt no regret, only acceptance. Days passed without incident, no sudden fallout, no instant reward, just normal routines slowly stacking up. Mark paid part of the rent. He worked extra hours. He cooked simple meals. Life moved forward in inches. One evening Mrs. Alvarez knocked on his door. She brought leftover soup and asked how he was doing. Mark said better. She smiled and said good. Sometimes that was enough. Later that night Mark sat alone with the lights low. He thought about how close he came to staying silent, how easy it would have been to walk away. He realized that courage did not arrive as confidence, it arrived as discomfort you chose not to avoid. Mark understood that the story he found underwater was not his to own, but his response to it was. That was the part that mattered. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man who showed up when it counted, and that felt like a win. As the city hummed outside, Mark leaned back and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own problems, bills, work, uncertainty, but tonight he felt aligned with himself. The ocean still held its secrets, the world still moved in unfair ways, but Mark knew one thing clearly. Doing the right thing does not always change the world. Sometimes it just changes how you live in it. And for now that was enough.